Welcome to the Surfcast Podcast. Today, we've got kind of an interesting subject, something that Jerry and I are going to put some serious opinionated takes on, some angles that are not right, not wrong. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, I don't know, but they're definitely something, even as opinionated and as hard and fast as I'm going to stand on my takes, it's something that personally has evolved over the years, meaning, what I'm saying today wasn't what I had felt exactly a couple of years ago, and it's probably not what I'm going to feel in 3 years from now, but it's how I feel today, damn it, and that's where I'm going with it. So
That's right. Hot take.
Yeah. But one thing when we were kind of prepping for this, I thought was interesting too, was like, as listeners are gonna find out, I'm very set in certain ways with this, and sort of limited on what I believe as far as whether or not there is a case for using a treble hook smaller than a 3/0 in the surf, and which particular hooks I'm using. Where on the almost opposite side, Jerry, you're real specific, and you get into you more fine tune them than I do. So since you've probably got a little bit more on that side of it, let's send it over to you to get things going today.
Oh, great! You're gonna make me go first, so I get all the hate mail first, right? That's that what this is. This is the tactic. So the concept of whether or not a 2-0 has a real place in the surf for striped bass, I think it's important to point out, which is a little bit what you were alluding to, that there are no nevers and there are no always and there are no rules in the surf, that there are exceptions to every rule. And there's the wonderful phrase that we say all the time, and I am super guilty of, is it depends. It depends on what you're trying to do. Now, with that being said, okay, I have also evolved in my take on this a lot. And I nowadays really try to stick to a 4-0 treble hook or larger. But the question becomes very quickly, do you want to have a high chance of landing a larger fish, something over 30 or 35 pounds? Or do you want your plug to swim as designed or swim at all? Because that's really where we start to get into with this question of treble hooks. Yes, I am very particular about my treble hooks. I use a wide range of everything from size 1 all the way up to size 6.0. But they also run the gamut in terms of their strength and their cost and their finish and the size of the barb and all of that stuff. So that really makes a big difference too, because in my mind, I really am trying to keep things swimming the way they were supposed to be, the way they were designed. So, if you have something like a bomber or a mag darter or an SP minnow, it is, and I'll go out on the limb and say this, it's impossible to get that thing to swim really at all with a 4.0 on it, even if you use something like the basic VMC 9626, which we would both consider to be a pretty basic, not as strong hook compared to a lot of the things that are out there, even though a lot of anglers use those as an upgrade. That's like their upgrade hook. We consider those the bottom of the barrel. So really, the first thing I want to make very clear is that, is there a place for a 2.0 in the surf? Certainly, if you want to use one of those plugs, there is. Because for a lot of those smaller plugs, again, the mag darter, the SP, the sword, or something like that, a 2.0 is probably as big as you can get and still have it swim pretty reliably. If you go bigger than that, you start to really destroy the action of the lure. But the question becomes, and this is where I'll stop for a second and I'll throw it back to you. The question becomes, do you care about using a plug that swims correctly if you're forced to use a 2.0 and now your chances of losing a big fish or landing a big fish is very high, right? So is it even worth using those plugs? So now it becomes not a question of the hook size, but should you even be using those plugs at all? So that's a little bit, just an intro on my thoughts on the 2.0. It's more about plug swimming correctly, whatever that means, versus landing the fish. And where do you fall on that? And I know that's kind of where you're at, Toby, so I'm going to throw that back to you now a little bit, just a comment.
Yeah, I'm sure anyone that's familiar with me, through the podcast, through writing, etc., is going to probably already know that I'm definitely leaning on using a tool that's going to afford me a better chance at landing those bigger fish. So I take that even to the degree of if a plug somehow only swims correctly with a 2.0 smaller hook, it's basically excluded from my big fish arsenal.
That's right.
I mean, I'm willing to throw that plug out for big fish targeting. I might still use it, if I'm targeting weak fish, if I'm doing, some tidal river back bay type stuff, first couple trips, shakedowns or the last trips or something like that. But when I'm talking the meat of my season, when big fish are my goal, if the plug cannot be made to swim properly or effectively with a 3.0 or most of the time a 4.0,
that's right, I'm
not even touching it. And that's a little bit differently from what you just said, that you're trying to make the plug swim right and keep it in that original form. I'm trying to twist and tweak and manipulate that plug to my want and my need and my desires. So that might mean if I up that treble on the belly, let's say, because I do have a couple of 6-inch plastic swimmers like the Swarter, like the Bomber, that do see big fish targeting time for me, and I use a 3.0, and I manipulate them, whether it's with weighting them, with split ring adjustments, with adjustments on what I balance on the tail to get it to maybe not swim exactly as it was designed, but to a point where I feel it's swimming effectively enough to tempt the fish, and then ultimately I can still land the fish. Because like the point you made is your concern being able to, make the lure swim right, to hook the fish. Well, if I can't land the fish, that is of zero use to me. I don't need any more heartbreaks in the surf. Right. So I just kind of push that aside, and that's, right out the gate, that's the direction that I take with it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I guess I totally agree with you, and that's sort of even the point I was trying to make, that, if you can't land the fish, it doesn't matter if you can attract them. Like, it's irrelevant. Now, I think that's how you and I are agreeing on this, and that's our take, but I don't know if everyone would agree with us. Because you could also argue the other way. If you can never get a fish to take a plug, then how can you land it? And I think a lot of anglers believe deeply, and again, this is all belief. It's all, it's based on where you're fishing and what you're doing and our beliefs, but a lot of anglers believe that there are certain plugs that cannot accept a 4 or 5.0 hook, that must require a 2.0, and that without that plug, they don't feel they would catch any fish. And so you and I don't believe that. I don't believe that for a second. In the places I fish, I just don't buy it. I also will say there are plugs in my arsenal that I use with a 2.0. I mean, you and I both have already talked about this. So there are certain ones I use 2.0. So I don't want to say I don't use any, because that's not true. But I will say this, Toby, which is an interesting thing you just brought up. I use plugs with 2.0s very, very limited. There really are just a few of them. One of them in particular is the Bomber, like the A-Salt or the 16A, something like that. That's one that I do use. I won't call it regular, but I will say it's in my bag, I don't know, 25% of nights, let's say, something like that, right? But from there, I have very few plugs that have a 3.0. I jump to 4. So if it's sort of all or nothing in my book. I have 2.0 plugs, and they're the small things that I feel I would be missing fish and missing out on things as part of my season. And then from there, I jump up to the guaranteed landing, which is total garbage. I can't believe I just said that. But the more guaranteed landing of a fish with a 4.0 and up. So that's the thing. And I'll also respond to one more thing before you jump in again. And that's that I sort of avoided the idea of tuning. Yes, I do, because you just mentioned it, I do tune my plugs with the size and design and weight of the front treble hook. But I was kind of avoiding all that. I wasn't going to open all those cans of worms. I really was just trying to say, look, I get it. Guys say to me all the time, one of my friends, my good friends, he says to me all the time, the SP minnow doesn't swim unless you use the stock hooks. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't matter, because if you catch a 25-inch fish, they mangle those. So what's the point? But their point is, yeah, but you're not going to catch anything, and I'm going to catch fish, because even if I only land 20% due to the hook, you're going to land 0 because you're not throwing it. That's their argument. You know what I mean? So there was a lot there. So have fun commenting on anything I just said, because I just gave you like 50 billion things to think about. But
the thing that jumped out at me as you were saying it, because it got me like doing a little math in my head as to where I am, where you said you go 2-0, then you jump right to 4-0. And so I was like, well, I'm trying to think how, I don't really have any 2-0s. And aside from, like leftovers that I've sort of continued to stretch along with, I can't remember the last time I bought a 2-0 or smaller treble on purpose, other than maybe freshwater. But I've got my hook shelf, a 25 count box of 3-0s. I've got 4 25 counts of 4-0s, and then 2 25 counts of 5-0s. And that really falls in line with, and really that 3-0, I could probably cut that in half, and that, as it's a couple of seasons old. I don't use it a whole lot. It's really just a couple of the plugs, but the 4-0 does see the vast majority of my usage right now. But that's where I'd said in the intro, it has evolving, it's changed, because not too many years ago, I would have said it was almost even split between 4-0s and 5-0s, with 5-0s maybe even having the edge at times.
Yeah.
And
wow.
It's funny, like, I won't get into the whole depth of the story of it, but it was one outing with Jay where he was fishing the exact same needlefish as I was with a 4-0, and I had the 5-0, and I couldn't buy a fish. He was, no exaggeration, 30-pounder, 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 and it made me just start to rethink things again, that I almost went too far and too extreme on the big hook side, and now I do think about that a little bit more, and ended up, like I said, dialing back a lot of the 5-0 usage to pretty much, majority of 4-0s. Now, one thing, I don't know if you want to even get into manufacturers.
Yeah, well, so that's what I wanted to jump in really quick, because I think this is important. I was waiting for a chance. When we say you're using 3-0s and 4-0s, though, what actual hook are you using? Because this is a very important consideration.
Yeah, so for me, if I'm buying hooks right now, 3-0, 4-0, 5-0 trebles, they are the Mustad 5X. I don't know off the top of my head what the model number.
The 9430s. Yep.
Okay, there you go. That's what I'm using for, again, 3-0, 4-0, 5-0. It's a beefy, heavy-ass hook.
Yeah, it is.
I know a lot of people hate the thing because of that, but that's what I love about it. If I don't own anything under a 3-0 on that style. If I'm going less than a 3-0, I'm in that spring, fall title, I've got the leftover stock of VMC, the 6X.
Okay.
2-0s, 1-0s, whatever else. I literally have like a plain, and they're just they are not organized. They are just thrown in, because as I'd upgrade and change out hooks and things, they just go into this thing. And at one point I considered like giving it away or tossing it. I'm like, I'll keep a hold of it, and kind of happy I did now, because there are those slim scenarios.
That's right.
Use it.
Yeah.
But that's another piece too, where from the intro where I said like I used to think about like different hook styles and sizes and manufacturing, all that stuff, for all of the different plugs and what one's going to work. And now I make each one work with just sort of this one line of hooks, those Mustad 5X. Whereas you knew that model number right off the top of my head, which I used to be able to do that kind of stuff, and now it doesn't affect. I don't take it into consideration. So that's the other side where you're different than I am as far as
that's right.
A variety of hooks. I can't even imagine what your hook shelf or collection looks like.
Yeah, there's a bin with just treble hooks in it. It's big. Yeah, so that's interesting. Something I didn't know. So first, a couple comments. First is, if you're using the 9430s, the Mustads, you're using 3-0s, 4-0s. You're really using the equivalent of 4-0, 5-0 almost, at least in terms of weight, when you compare it to the classic 9626 VMC that's on all of the Super Strikes, that's on the North Bars, it's on a lot of the Gibbs plugs, it's on the 24/7s, it comes with a lot of different lure manufacturers, both custom and factory. You're using the Mustad, so you're already like jumping up a little bit. So it's almost like you're like, yeah, I've come down to 4-0s and I use some 3-0s, but really no. Compared to the traditional surf, treble hook, You're actually still using 4-0s, 5-0s, and maybe even closer to 6-0s once you start getting up into the 5s. And another thing I didn't know until right now, because we learn things about each other on the podcast, which is so interesting because we talk for hours on the phone, but then we're learning things as we record, is I didn't realize you were using the 8527 VMCs. So that's those 6X ones, the Vandiums. Yeah. I was assuming when you were going to say that you were using the 9626s, which are the ones that come on all of those plugs. But you avoid those things like the plague. You really don't like the 9626s.
I can bend them with my hand. Like, yeah. I'm not the strongest person. I'm not, like an average dude. And I could take those regular trebles. What are they called? They call them 4X?
They're 4X,
maybe?
Yeah. They're considered 4X, yeah.
I can literally bend them in my fingers. I think the 1.0s on the 4X, I might see a little use on those for very limited. Those, for some reason, always felt to me like they were a thicker wire for the size of the hook. But even at that, I don't feel good.
Yeah, and that's interesting.
It doesn't make me comfortable.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think this is one of the most hypocritical things that I do. In the surf, we all have hypocritical things we do. There's things that we know we shouldn't do, or we tell other people what they shouldn't do, and then we do something different, And I actually still do use and employ 4.0 9626 plugs. I don't use anything smaller than that, but I don't use in 9626s. Well, that's not exactly true either. There are some very small plugs that get some 2.0s that I use only very, very early in the year or for very specific purposes. And every time I throw one, I say a little prayer and look up at the sky and go, please don't let me have a big fish today, because then I'm going to, I have no excuse. I should just quit fishing. So anyways, I do use the 9626 occasionally. And some anglers have been critical of me for that specific purpose. And they're right. I don't know what to say. But I believe, again, hypocritical, that there are a few plugs that I think swim better with that specific hook versus some of the alternatives. Now, could I use the VMC 8527, that Vandium, that 6X? Yes. Am I cheap? Yes, that's why I don't. Do I take care of my stuff? No, that's why I don't use them, because I don't want to pay the extra, and then I don't rinse my stuff. I don't rinse my plugs, and those hooks are they're going to die. And so with the 9626s, I don't mind swapping them the second they get a little bit of rust or they get a little bit of the edge off. I just ditch them. So I'm changing those constantly. So I have a pretty big stock of those. Now, but to your point, you keep alluding to this, and I've been a little bit evasive, I guess, maybe, in answering you. Yes, I have a lot of different hooks. I am also terrible at spending way too much money on treble hooks. I'm a huge fan of 3 specifics. I really like the Owner ST66s, which are insanely sharp. They are crazy sticky. They have a small barb. They have a thin wire. They're very penetrating. The Saltex, the Tsunami Saltex hooks, also another one that I really like more recently. And then there's several BKK products that I really like, Raptors being one of them. But one of the plugs I want to bring up before I forget, if you want to use a 2.0 hook, or if you want to use a plug that swims best with a 2.0, but you really would like it with a 3.0, a hook I would strongly recommend is the BKK Viper 41. I don't know what the 41 stands for, but it's the Viper, and it's a much lighter wire hook. Okay, so it's physically lighter, but it's much stronger. It's very strong. They are crazy expensive. I can't remember exactly, but I know they're more than $2 a hook. I mean, they're very expensive. But because they're lighter, they're much better. And this gets into something else really important about them that I think goes beyond just the weight and how it makes the plug swim. And that's that the tines, which is the hook portion of it, has a wider gap between the central portion of the hook and the outer point. And this is part of the problem of a 2.0 or a 1.0 hook that guys just don't even pay any attention to. Anglers don't pay any attention to it. They go, it's going to bend. That's why I'm not going to use a 1.0 or 2.0. But, Toby, don't you agree that maybe an even bigger point, because you can go a little soft in your drag, if you're fishing a sand beach and you can let a fish run, you don't have any purchase. You don't have any grip on that fish because the gap is so small, right? You agree with that?
100%. I mean, it's almost like I look at a 2.0 or a 1.0 and then I just compare it to a 4.0 Mustad and that bite. I'm like, how does this thing even hold? Get a good purchase, and that's why, I mean, we're not going to go this direction today, but if I got to throw some of those lighter stuff, that's where the single inlines come into play for me.
Yeah, that's right. Or switching for me to some kind of soft plastic with a jig head. Yeah, trying to get around it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and because again, then if you're on a soft plastic or something, the jig head, it's a 5 or a 6/0 hook. You got the bigger bite, so not even getting into that. That's well, you use one of yours. That's a topic for another day.
Yeah. They love when I say that, so you got to say it this time.
I threw it in this time. I'll take the heat. But no, that's a point that, like you said, I think it's great that you mentioned that. A lot of people don't think about it, don't mention it, or if they think about it, they're sure as heck not making it vocal, because I can't think of a time where that was a conversation. When the hook subject comes up, the trebles. What hooks do I buy? What trebles do I need for this? And I'm going to take the shot. The standard stripers online main forum post. What hooks do I need for this plug? It is never about that hook gap, the ability to make that initial purchase. It's always about, you've already gotten past that point. The hook is in the meat of the fish, and there's no chance that this one will last, and there's you got a better shot with that one. And I'm to a degree, I'm guilty of it myself, as far as talking about it too, whether it's because I've sort of automatically gotten over that. I've gotten over that in my head, that I don't even look to that as a consideration, or it's just I forget to talk about it. But I'm just as guilty as anyone else, and not talk about or bring that point up enough.
Yeah, and it's really important. I think that one of the future topics, which this is now bringing up, is identifying and deciding where the weak point in your tackle chain is. So deciding where that is. A lot of anglers do not consider all the factors in the hook and where that weakness is at that point. But there's a lot of other places where you can either have more weakness or make up for the weakness in other ways. And that would be a great topic for another podcast. I mean, we're barely even touching on the treble hook, because we're not talking about the length of the point, the size of the barb, the construction of the bend, the forged or shape of the actual loop where it attaches to the plug, all of that stuff, how far in the point's face, all of that stuff. There's all kinds of elements we haven't even touched on. But I think at this point, we just have to throw it to our listeners to let us know what they like, if we've missed something. I'm really excited about testing out the new Mustad jaw lock, which I don't even know if exists, because we don't really always talk about this topic. But that's another one that I'm testing out. I think this is where we say, okay, send us the hate mail about why you love your 2 O's and your 1 O's and why you think that we're off our rocker, or send us love mail and say, man, I agree with you so much, and I've switched and I caught my personal best because of you, because we want those emails as well, right, Toby?
As I say, though, with some of the other plug talks, though, I don't want to hear you making your entire case off that one fish that one guy who knows your friend's uncle's cousin once landed and it works. I want consistency.
That's right, Toby. And I think that's a great place to leave it for today. This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast at surfcastpodcast.com, or definitely check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, at the Surfcast Podcast.